Hello, my name is Mamie Allen, and I'm an instructor here at Ultimate Medical Academy. In today's lecture, we'll discuss the sensory system, specifically the eyes. We'll move on to the ears in our part 2. So let's dive in. Let's first begin by taking a look at some of the related combining forms that are associated with our sensory system. So we have for the eyes, opto, optico, ophthalmo. All of those would pertain to the structure eyes, and the primary function would be sense of sight. Next, we have the iris, and the iris controls the amount of sunlight entering the eye, and the combining form for that would be iri, iro, irido, irito, all of those. As you can see, it has that letter O for the combining form. For lens, we have phaco, spelled with a C as well as a K. Retina is easy to remember because it's similar to the name itself, retino for retina. The purpose of the retina would be to convert any light images into those electrical impulses that transmits it to the brain. Then we have our lacrimal apparatus, and we see some words for that would be lacrimo, dacrycisto. These would be accessory structures of the eye that produce, store, as well as remove tears. And then for ears, we have a few. We have acousto, acousto, audio, audito. All of those would be receptor organs for our sense of hearing, and it also helps us maintain our balance. Then we have the parts of the ear. The outer ear would be the pinny, P-I-N-N-I. The middle ear would be the myringo or the tympano. And then the inner ear would be the labyrinthro. Now, when we're looking here, this would receive sound vibrations and transmit those vibrations to the brain. Our eyes are the receptor organs of sight, and their function is to receive those images and transmit it to the brain. In relation to the eyes, you may see abbreviations used commonly, OD and OS. OD would refer to the right eye, and the OD stands for oculus dexter, whereas the OS refers to the left eye, and this stands for oculus sinister. If we were to break that down, oculus means eye, and the plural is oculi. Here we have the structures of the eye. So we would have the eyeball and the adnexa. Now what's important to note here is that each structure will have substructures within itself, and we'll take a look at those. Here we have the structures of the eyes. Now the structures of the eye would include the eyeball and the adnexa that are attached to or surround the eyeball itself. We can see here some of those structures. Now, the adnexa is also known as the adnexa oculi, and these would be the structures that you see outside of the eyeball. And those would include your orbit area, your eye muscles, the eyelids, eyelashes, the conjunctiva, as well as the lacrimal apparatus. Adnexa means accessory or adjoining parts of an organ. Now, the orbital area is known as the eye socket, and this would be the bony cavity of the skull that contains and protects the eyeball and its associated muscles, those blood vessels, as well as the nerves. Here we have the muscles of the eye. We can see we have the superior and inferior oblique muscles. We have the superior and inferior rectus muscles, and then the lateral and medial rectus muscles. You'll notice that they are arranged in 3 pairs. Now, these muscles make it possible for our eyes to move in different directions. Oblique describes an angle that is slanted but not quite perpendicular or parallel, and the term rectus means straight. Now we're moving on to the eyelids, the eyebrows, and the eyelashes. Now the upper and lower eyelids, together with the eyebrows as well as the lashes, they help protect the eyeball from any foreign matter, excessive light, and also injuries that are due to other external causes. We have the canthus, and this is the angle where the upper and lower eyelids meet. If we were to break this term down, canth means corner of the eye, and the us is a singular noun ending. The plural form of canthus is canthi. And then we have the cilia, and the cilia makes it possible for that movement. These are those small hairs that make up the eyebrows and the eyelashes. The cilia are also present in the nose to prevent foreign matter from being inhaled. In this illustration, we can take a closer look at the conjunctiva. The conjunctiva is that transparent mucous membrane that would line the underside of each eyelid, and it continues to form that protective covering over our exposed surface of the eyeball itself. Now, conjunctiva is the singular term, but the plural form would be conjunctivae. Next, we have the lacrimal apparatus, and this is also known as our tear apparatus, and it will consist of structures that will produce, store, as well as remove tears. Now, the secretion of tears is referred to as the term lacrimation. Now, within the lacrimal apparatus, we also have lacrimal glands. Now, these glands will secrete lacrimal fluid, or another way to say lacrimal fluid is to say tears. It will secrete those tears that are located on the underside of the upper eyelid, just above the outer corner of each eye. Now, within each corner, we also have that lacrimal fluid, and this is known as the tears. The purpose is to maintain moisture on the anterior surface of the eyeball. Remember, anterior is a medical term meaning the front of. Blinking distributes the lacrimal fluid across the eye, or we can say distributes the tears across the eye. Now, how are our tears actually transported? And this will consist of lacrimal canals, the sac itself, as well as the lacrimal duct. If we're looking at the lacrimal canal, this will consist of a duct at the inner corner of each eye. Now, these ducts will collect the tears and then empty them back into the lacrimal sacs. Crying would be the overflowing of tears from the lacrimal canals. Next, we have the lacrimal sac, which is also called the tear sac. This is simply an enlargement of the upper portion of the lacrimal duct itself. And then lacrimal duct also goes by the name nasolacrimal duct because it's close to our nasal cavity. And this would be the passageway that actually drains excess tears into the nose. Whenever you hear the term optic, this means pertaining to the eye or pertaining to sight or vision. OPT, the opt, means vision, and ic just means pertaining to. So if we were to look at different parts, the ocular, of course, pertaining to the eye, we also can break that down into extraocular and intraocular. Notice the change in the prefix. Extraocular means outside of the eye. Let's break that term down. Extra means on the outside. Ocul, the OCUL, would pertain to the eye. And then the AR, that suffix, would mean pertaining to. So extraocular means outside of the eyeball, or we can say pertaining to outside of the eyeball. Next, we have intraocular, and this means within the eyeball. Notice the prefix intra, meaning within. Ocul, that OCUL, means eye. And then we have the suffix of AR, the R meaning pertaining to. So intraocular means pertaining to within the eyeball. As with many different body systems, it's also important to be able to identify the layers of that system or that structure. Here we have the walls of the eyeball, and they're made up of 3 layers. We have the sclera, the choroid, and then the retina. Let's take a look at the sclera first. This is also known as the white of the eye, which we see the most of. And the purpose of the sclera is to maintain the shape of the eye as well as protect the delicate inner layers of tissue. Now, this tough fibrous tissue begins to form the outer layer of the eye, except for the part that's covered by our cornea. Breaking the term down, sclero means the white part of your eye, and it also means hard. Take a look at the second layer, the choroid, also known as the choroid coat. Now, this is the opaque middle layer of the eyeball, and this will contain many blood vessels and provides the blood supply for our entire eye. Opaque means light cannot pass through this substance. And the next or the last layer would be the retina, and this is the sensitive, most inner layer that lines our posterior part of the eye. Our retina receives nerve impulses as well as transmitted to the brain via the optic nerve. Now, this is also known as the second cranial nerve that may have been discussed in a previous chapter. So we've taken a look at the layers. Now let's look at the different sections of the eyeball, or we can call those sections segments. starting first with the front segment or the anterior. So here we can see the anterior of the eyeball will be divided into anterior as well as posterior segments. So let's take a look at the anterior first, and you'll see this shown in picture A. Now the anterior portion makes up the front 1/3 of our eyeball, and this segment is divided into, remember, two chambers, the front and the back, or we can say the anterior and the posterior. It's important to note the anterior chamber is located behind the cornea and in front of the iris, and the posterior chamber is located behind the iris but in front of the ligaments that actually hold the lens in place. And then we also have a substance that we refer to as aqueous humor, or you may hear it referred to as aqueous fluid. And this is what fills both of these chambers. When we break this term down, aqueous means watery or containing water. Now looking at picture B, which would be the posterior part of the eye, this makes up the remaining 2/3 of the eyeball, and it's lined with the retina and then filled with vitreous humor. We call vitreous humor vitreous gel, and this is just a soft, clear, jelly-like substance that contains millions of fine fibers. Now, these fibers are attached to the surface of the retina, and this also helps maintain the eye shape. Now let's take a closer look at some of the structures of the retina, starting with the rods and the cones. Now these receive images that have passed through the lens of the eye. Now, these images are converted into nerve impulses and then transmitted to the brain via that optic nerve. When we hear rods, this means our black and white receptors, or the black and white color, and then cones identifies color receptors. Next, we have the uvea, and this is the pigmented layer of the eye, where it has a rich blood supply and consists of the choroid, the ciliary body, as well as the iris. So let's take a look at those. So beginning with the iris, this would be that colorful circular structure that surrounds the pupil. These muscles control the amount of light that's allowed to enter the eye and then pass through the pupil. So to decrease the amount of light that enters the eye, the muscles of the iris will contract, and this makes the opening of the pupil smaller. But on the other hand, to increase the amount of light that enters the eye, you'll see those same muscles relax, or we may refer to it as dilating, and this makes the opening of the pupil larger. Next is the cornea, and this would be that transparent outer surface of the eye that covers the iris and the pupil, and it's also the primary structure for focusing light rays that enter the eye. Next, the pupil, this would be that black circular opening that's in the center of the iris, and this actually permits the light to enter the eye. And then we have the lens of the eye, and this would just be that clear, flexible, curved structure that allows us to focus on images, and this occurs on the retina. The lens is contained within a clear capsule, and this is located behind the iris and the pupil. So thus far we've taken a look at the structures of the eye. Now let's look at the normal functioning of our eyes, starting with accommodation. Accommodation is a term you may hear that simply means the process whereby our eyes begin to make adjustments for seeing objects that are at varying distances. Now these adjustments may include narrowing as well as widening of our pupils, the movement of our eyes, as well as changes in the shapes of our lens. And then we also have convergence. And convergence would be that simultaneous inward movement of our eyes toward each other. This would occur in an effort to maintain single binocular vision as an object comes closer to you. Emmetropia is also a normal action of the eye. Here, this would be the normal relationship between the refractive power of the eye and the shape of the eye that actually enables those light rays to focus correctly on the retina. So if you hear emmetropia, this simply means the patient has normal vision. Emmetropia means proper measure. Let's spell that so we can make sure we have it right. E-M-M-E-T-R. I tried to pronounce it, but I don't think I was so successful. And then we have opia, which means vision condition. Moving on to refraction, which is also known as refractive power. This is the ability of our lens to bend the light rays so they tend to focus on the retina. And the last probably is not uncommon to you, the visual acuity. This can also be performed in a test to diagnose certain conditions. With visual acuity, this would be the ability to distinguish object details and shapes at a distance. And remember, those distances may vary. Acuity means sharpness. To wrap up, in today's lecture, we discussed various procedures that are used to treat different disorders and diseases of our sensory system, specifically those eye structures. Good luck in your studies this week.